Jung was a scientist, a medical doctor, and the founder of analytical psychology. But he also cast horoscopes, consulted the I Ching, and believed that the tarot could reveal the unconscious mind. To many, this sounds like a contradiction, but to Jung, this was his method. In this video, we will explore why one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century used divination, not to predict the future, but to uncover the hidden forces behind what shapes the mind. Hi there, I'm Yvette, a neuroscientist and an author of several neuroscience studies. On this channel, I like to break down how the brain works, decode its mysteries, and how we can apply this knowledge to our lives. So, if this sounds like something up your alley, I would just suggest to hit the subscribe button. Jung once had a patient, a young woman who was highly intelligent, well-educated and entirely rational. But despite all her awareness, she was stuck. No matter how much they analyzed her dreams, discussed her childhood, or used traditional psychoanalytical tools, nothing moved. She remained closed off, emotionally flat, disconnected from her deeper self. Then one day, Jung asked for her birth time and drew up her natal chart. Not to predict her future, but to see if any archetypical patterns in her chart might mirror the complexes he was encountering in therapy. When he brought up the chart in their session, something unexpected happened. The patient softened. She became curious. She let her guard down because the chart wasn't judging or labeling or pathologizing her. Instead, it was simply reflecting back a map of possibility. She began to speak about herself, not in terms of what was wrong with her, but in terms of myth, story, symbol, and inner potential. That session opened the door to a therapeutic breakthrough. For Jung, the unconscious wasn't just a place of repressed desires. It was a rich symbolic realm, a vast inner landscape filled with dreams, myths, and archetypes that connected us to a shared human history. But how do you access actually the unconscious? Jung believed that symbols were the key, because symbols bypass the rational defenses and speak directly to our inner world. And divination systems, with their mysterious and archetypical imagery, provide a structured way to engage with that world. And so, to Jung, divination was a psychological X-ray. But what were these tools, and why did he trust them to reveal what logic could not? During a tense debate with his mentor Sigmund Freud, and one that would later signal the end of their relationship, Jung insisted that not all psychic phenomena could be reduced to sexual drives. Freud completely disagreed. As the tension peaked, Jung felt an internal pressure mounting, and suddenly, with no physical cause, loud cracks split the bookshelf beside him. Jung exclaimed that that's what he meant by synchronicity, whereas Freud dismissed it as coincidence. But for Jung, that moment marked the rift between psychology of reduction and psychology of symbol and meaning. From this moment forward, Jung turned towards methods that Freud would have dismissed as unscientific: astrology, the tarot, and I Ching. And he later wrote that astrology is one of the intuitive methods like the I Ching, geomancy, and other divinatory techniques. It is based on the synchronicity principle. So, when it comes to astrology, Jung wasn't interested whether if Mercury was ruining your day. He used astrology as a language of archetypes to map personality and also existential tensions. In fact, he famously said that astrology represents the sum of all the psychological knowledge of antiquity. He would cast horoscopes at key moments in therapy, but not to foretell the destiny of the patient, but to reveal psychic patterns and invite reflection. The same as with tarot. Jung didn't use tarot to divine the future. He saw his figures like the Fool, the Empress, the Tower, Death, as living symbols, mirrors of the human journey. Each card held a story, and when a patient drew a card, it gave shape to inner feelings that they hadn't yet named. On this note, one patient later described this method as dreaming while still awake. And then comes the I Ching, a method that Jung truly respected. He wrote the foreword to Wilhelm's translation, and he then later used it himself. He believed that its randomness opened the door to something deeper, a phenomenon that he later termed as synchronicity. Each system that I have mentioned today uses symbolic language to bypass the rational mind and speak directly to the unconscious mind. But you might be asking, how could it be that something as random as picking a card or tossing a coin could lead to psychological insight? And this is where Jung's theory of synchronicity comes in. After his break with Freud, Jung descended into a personal crisis. Isolated and unsure, he began to record his dreams dreams and visions, trying to understand his unconscious directly. One night he dreamt of a patient that he hadn't seen in years, and the next morning she had wrote to him to schedule an appointment. This was not the first time for him that such a coincidence occurred. These experiences weren't explainable by logic, and therefore Jung had to come up with his own framework. And this framework he coined as synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence of inner and outer events that are not connected by causality, but by meaning, where he later said that whatever is born or done at a particular moment of time has the quality of this moment of time. This means that Jung believed that the configuration of the stars at the moment of birth didn't cause your personality. However, they reflected it. Like a snowflake forming from atmospheric conditions, your psyche crystallized within a symbolic context. And these ideas weren't arbitrary. Jung saw the same psychological logic in Eastern philosophy, Western alchemy, and also myth. For example, in Taoism, he found the balance between opposites, like the yin and yang. And this idea mirrored his own ideas in psychological wholeness. He wrote that the I Ching insists upon self-knowledge throughout. The images appeal not to the intellect, but to the intuition. To Jung, divination methods tapped into the collective unconscious, using synchronicity to create mirrors of the soul. So, let's pause with this thought for a moment. This sounds woo-woo even now. Imagine how it sounded in his time. So, why was Jung doing all of this? So why not stick to talk therapy, analysis, and taking notes? For sure it would have made his life easy. And that is because he realized that some truths live beyond words. And symbols, especially the random ones, can unlock doors that our unconscious mind likes to keep closed. So far we have discussed a lot about how to reach the unconscious mind. However, what is it exactly, and what forces live inside of it? At one point in his career, Jung noticed a troubling pattern in his patients, but also in himself. He noticed that in general, people wore masks. They took on socially acceptable roles, ran emotional scripts, and even their dreams were of who they thought they should be. However, behind these masks lived suppressed emotions, disowned traits, and untapped potentials. And this part of the psyche Jung called the shadow. The shadow is formed over time. As children, we learn what behaviors are rewarded and what we suppress, whether if it's anger, sadness, sexuality, or even creativity, gets pushed to the unconscious. And if we use Jung's words, the less the shadow is embodied in the conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. But the shadow doesn't just contain darkness, it also contains our light, our strengths, such as rejected strengths, wildness, ambition, intuition, and also authentic desires. And since somehow we are ashamed of this part of ourselves, the shadow hates direct confrontation. And therefore, this is why Jung turned to symbolism. Because in divination, a card like the devil could mean addiction but also suppressed desire. A Scorpio moon can mean a repressed anger or vulnerability. And the line from the I Ching can evoke a long ignored internal conflict. These tools externalize the shadow, allowing it to be seen without shame. They offer metaphors for what the ego cannot yet face directly, as one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And the symbolic figures aren't random. The archetypes that Jung saw across cultures, such as the hero, the mother, the trickster, and the sage. Jung believed that integrating these inner archetypes, especially the ones that we deny, because this is what the purpose of inner work is. And that inner work for Jung had a name, which is individuation. Once, Jung undertook a private journey, documented in what would later be known as the Red Book. In this book, he sketched mandalas, dialogued with his inner figures, and also recorded his dreams and symbols obsessively. And this wasn't madness, it was his method. At this point, Jung was undergoing individuation, which is the process of becoming a whole integrated self. Individuation involves bringing the unconscious content into consciousness, and thereby reconciling the many fragments of the psyche, such as the persona, which is the mask that we wear, the shadow, which are the parts that we suppress, the anima and animus, which are the inner opposites, and finally the self, which is our psychological center and our wholeness. Each step requires that we encounter an archetype, wrestle with it, and finally reclaim something vital about ourselves. Individuation isn't self-improvement, it is self-integration. And here, divination can be a guide. And it is not because the cards and stars know who you are, but it's because they mirror something in you that you have forgotten, hidden, or are afraid to name. And this is why Jung used symbols, not to escape reality, but to meet it fully, with imagination, insight, and a willingness to look within. So, even though Jung's methods seem unconventional even for today, they were grounded in a deep desire to heal, to integrate, and to help others do the same. So maybe we should all take a page from Jung's book and start to notice more what symbols in our everyday life speak to us. Not because they were placed there by some cosmic design, but because our brains chose to notice them. And this is worth noticing. And if you're curious to know why astrology sometimes feels so personal, even if you don't believe in it, I would suggest you to check out this following video, whereby I talk about the neuroscience of astrology. And with this, thanks for watching and see you in the next one. Ciao!